grassroots movement.
So I've basically thrown away most of my notes. And I have the benefit in some respects of coming after, the three people who preceded me. You'll be all right. I really want to talk to this audience and been picking up on a couple of different pieces. Now, when I say this audience, from the perspective of this table, the vast majority of you are phenotypically white. And that's who I'm trying to speak to in terms of articulating some points of strategy. Most of what I've heard here I agree with. There are some points I would have some nuance with. We can discuss that a bit later. But the critical thing, I think, in terms of strategy that I do want to get back to and kind of push a little bit forward is a point that Mike ended on about the need for a strategic alliance between the oppressed peoples of the U.S. empire and the working class, right? Don't think that's an underestimated point, and I think for a lot of the younger generation, there's lip service kind of paid to it, but not enough strategic thinking which is really put forward to understand what that means. One of the things, and it's not just a point of linguistic debate, but I think we really need to kind of challenge this whole notion around people of color, that particular framing of things. It's problematic in a number of different ways. I won't get into a lot of it here, but, people of color keeps things fundamentally at kind of an individual or personal basis and does not get into the collective histories of the peoples who were either here before the European conquest and settlement, or those of us who were brought here against our will, or those of us who more recently been absorbed by the empire in one form or another. And how we enter into our particular relationships with capitalism, colonialism, and white supremacy. Y'all gotta excuse me, I'm still dealing with a cold. And unless we really understand how all of us fit into this beast structurally, we wind up too often coming up with strategies which are bound to fail, because you don't deal with the unequal nature and how each of us have been incorporated within the system, right? And at different vantage points, and how the system is able to play us off of each other because of the different ways we've been brought into it and incorporated within it, right? And that's something I think we particularly have to understand. Now, in saying that, one particular thing I want to talk about, I like the introduction of the conversation about white supremacy and taking that seriously. One idea I want to put out, and it's something I've been playing with, doing some research on, doing some thinking on, but it's not fully formulated by any means, so don't take it that way. But I've been putting forward an argument, at least the last 5 years, that capitalism, imperialism, and white supremacy are coming towards a historical breach and rupture with each other. And what that means, I think, in concrete reality is that the forces of white supremacist reaction are going to become immediately more inherently dangerous. And how are we prepared strategically, organizationally, and politically to deal with that type of reaction? We need to be honest, right now we're not. I can tell you from presently living in Georgia, if it came to a firefight, which it may come to, my side would lose pretty quickly, because the other side is far more organized and prepared than we are. And I'm not just talking about in the little, skinhead cells or the white councils this or the white councils that. The elements of white supremacy run much deeper than that. Those are just some of the surface, blow-off steam manifestations of it. But we're starting to see that the system is having to concentrate much more, elements of the system are having to concentrate much more time and energy into that as a strategic option to save itself, right? And to save certain types of spoils and to make sure that certain people remain on top of, the plantation. That's the game that's being played. And so I think we're in a period where it's particularly dangerous because the ruling class itself isn't clear on where it wants to go. Clearly understand that. They are not clear on where they want to go. They're not clear on how they're leading themselves out of this crisis, let alone try to lead us out of it, as their subordinates, right? and folks who are subject to their rule. And as a result of that, I would put forward, and this is not a doom and gloom prediction, but World War III is not out of the question. And I mean not out of the question in the terms of our immediate lives. Particularly, I think if the U.S., NATO, and the Arabian Gulf states kind of overplay their hand with Iran and a couple of other places over strategic resources, not just oil, but also water, things could get real interesting real quick. And to the extent that they've been able to kind of turn the tide on the people's movements of North Africa and Southeast Asia, create these proxy armies, renew their allegiances with certain jihadist forces, the folks, still thought that they were terrorists. They're playing a very dangerous game at all of our expense. And we better get real and recognize what it is. And I'm just not putting that in international context as if it has no blowback and no implications here. It has profound implications here that we need to be aware of and I think start getting prepared for. So revisiting that question, it's a challenge, I think, particularly to my understanding of the Northwest being very dominated by anarchist trends in particular. It's a question I would like to just put out on your strategic radar. How are you going to prepare to deal with that rupture? How are you going to prepare to organize within the white community to deal with this particular reactionary consciousness? That's a critical question. That as someone from the black liberation struggle, I can't do that work, right? It's not work. I can't go in the white community and organize white people. It's not going to go that far. It's not going to be that successful. So I need y'all as some solid allies to be able to engage that work and tackle it in a principled manner. So that's a question I put forward. I don't know what the strategy is. I know what the need to deal with the problem is. I feel that very painfully. But with the strategy how to deal with that, I don't know. I'd like to be in some sustained conversation, in the forces I represent, I'd like to be in some sustained conversation with all of you about how to do that. And what lessons can we draw about that? And it's an age-old question. It's not a new question. Organizing white people for, anything other than plunder has been a challenge for the left in the United States for a long time. So that's a strategic question I have to pose. I don't have the answer to that, right? Don't have the answer to that. But that is a question I'd like to pose to this audience. It's something I think we need to tackle. And it's definitely also related to this question of, the shrinking biosphere that we are leaving to the next generation. Those two things are connected, right? Because part of the whole notion of white supremacy is that I'm going to have to the exclusion of everybody else. Or fuck everybody else. It doesn't really matter, that you live on the planet with me. I'm going to take yours and have mine as well. And that's something we need to deal with because it's a part of the mentality which is destroying everything. And we have to fight against it. And I think, part of that notion, I think, is something that we are going to, related to that, I think, a strategic question we're going to have to deal with because part of some aspects of our understanding of communism from the 19th and 20th century also viewed the world as if it was an unlimited resource. And we know very clearly that it's a limited resource, right? And even if they make it to Mars or the moon or whatever the hell else they're trying to go to, you still going to have to deal with the contradictions that we've created on this planet. Because it's not like going in outer space is going to resolve those questions, right? Or resolve those debts. So we're still going to have to deal with that. So those are some challenges that we like to put forward. But just to end in terms of promoting a vision, one of the things from the political trend that I represent, I think would be clear to, put forward is that in our vision of ending, capitalism and imperialism within the United States is the fundamental premise that this is, settler colonial empire. It has to be dismantled. And that part of that dismantling means the self-determination of the oppressed peoples of this country, right? Oppressed peoples of this country. And that's a different framework than just asking for a certain kind of civil rights notions of equality. Very different notion, right? Me presenting about it, I wouldn't have the time to go into the details, but I do just want to put that on your consciousness and something to grapple with. You don't necessarily have to face that type of question in an upfront manner by, being confronted with a large indigenous population or a large Latino population in Washington. But other parts of this empire, you have to deal with that. The Southeast, the South, it's a real question, that you have to kind of pose. And if we're looking at this as an entire, dismantling this entire project and not just one particular piece of it, we got to start thinking in how do we relate to the whole, right, as well as relate to the particular parts to it. So those are some things I just want to put out. I'm much more interested at this point getting into a discussion with you all and a debate. There's a lot to debate. So I'm looking forward to that, and I'm looking forward to learning, because I do agree with this is a very dangerous, but it's also a very exciting time. And I think it's a time of experimentation, trying some of the old tried and true, understanding its limits is definitely something that we need to do. People have spoke to that. But I think definitely be open to exploring and creating a new culture. And there's some things from the old practices that shouldn't be abandoned. I'm one who I think have come through a system of coaching that went fairly well. I was allowed enough rope in my 20s to hang myself with a couple of times. But, there was always some folks who had my back to let me know when I did wrong and offer enough, criticism and guidance to try to steer me in some other directions. And I don't think that's a relationship that ends because one becomes 30 or one becomes 40 or 50. I think that's part of the comradeship that we have to build, of different ways of holding each other accountable continuously, because we're going to make mistakes. As individuals, as organizations, as movements, we are going to make mistakes. There's no question about that. There's no getting around it. The issue is, how do we learn from the mistakes? And I think that's the constant thing that we always have to struggle with.